So welcome to everybody. Good afternoon and good morning. As you can see, we believe thermal energy storage represents one of the most exciting investment opportunities today and certainly for the next couple of years. It's important, it's large, and there's a large variety of investment opportunities ranging from growth equity for corporates as well as for project financing, and it varies in stages, sizes, and in geographies. Alex and I will be hosting today's webinar for Pantokrator and are available for any questions should you have them afterwards. Alex, if you want to change the slide.
Yeah, sure.
We have 8 companies presenting today that actually represent the majority of this industry. They provide a great overview for the variety of technology solutions and applications available to industry. We have a wealth of information to cover today, and for those of you who might be a little time constrained, there will be a recording of this whole session that you could catch up on later. I'm also pleased to let you know that we have about 400 folks registered for today's webinar, which I think is really evidence of the interest in thermal energy storage. In terms of just the agenda of how we're going to run the webinar, we will kick things off. We'll have a quick 10 to 15 minute overview from ourselves on how we see thermal energy storage space. And this will be followed by individual presentations from each of the 8 companies. Each company will have 10 minutes to present with 5 minutes to follow with Q&A. At the end, we'll hear from Alex Campbell from the LDES Council and also Blaine Collison from the RTC, both of whom have been providing invaluable support to this sector over the last couple of years. So, and also just before we get started, we've been spending a lot of time on this space. So for those of you who haven't seen, we've got a load of webinars podcasts that we've already posted that are available. And we've got a couple more coming from the RTC and from Bren Miller and others. And for those of you who are also interested on the EV side of life, we will actually have a webinar, which we're calling a fireside chat, on the 13th of June. So just let us know if that's of interest. So let's get going. Why do we think this is an exciting and actually important space? I think you're all aware that 25% of greenhouse gases come from industrial heat. Coupled with that, there's a tectonic shift towards everything going electric, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The investment opportunity that is presenting itself is about $1.5 trillion over the next number of years, 10 to 15 years, but that's quite a significant amount. Already, we've seen about 800 million in the last year and a half to 2 years invested in this sector. So, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And from our count, there's just over 20 companies that are operating in the space. We'd love to have had all 20 of them, believe me. But I think a webinar with the top 8, I think is sufficient. So if we look at it from the industrial heat standpoint, there's been a lot of work in terms of electrifying power and transport. You can see that with the build out in solar and wind, as well as the growth in EVs. But industry, in particular industrial heat, actually is forecast to stay steady and in fact grow. So, and given that it's a quarter of greenhouse gases, there's a huge potential there. And as you can see on the pie chart on the right, that 74% of industrial power needs is actually heat, and almost all of that is coming from burning coal, natural gas, and oil. So there's a very small representation from electrical power. Now, why does this make sense? And for us, from our perspective, this is the key piece of the equation of how the energy transition could be successful. You've got, as you can see, renewables have gotten a lot cheaper over the years. In fact, probably 10 years ago. But if you were to add in the cost of the grid, then you'd actually find that we're actually only penetrating the cost of coal and natural gas probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So therefore, from a cost of power, from apples to apples, if you will, the time is right. That small uptick in solar cost as well as wind cost, that's more to do with interest rates and import tariffs. But we suspect that as interest rates come down, that will continue its path. I guess the big point for us on power to heat, electrical power to industrial heat, is what's often overlooked is its 90% efficiency. We have this ingrained perception that in order to get something hot, you have to burn things, but that's simply not true. And furthermore, a lot of the tech is pretty much proven. Yes, there will be improvements and enhancements as we go along, but as you'll see from the companies presenting today, there are already some pretty good evidence of stuff that actually works. Furthermore, the materials are easily available, they're cheap, and then they've been used in other industries. The other point that we like is that, with heat, you can, create heat, steam for industry, but also where needed, you could use it for power. So you've got a dual sort of offtake, if you will. And I think one of the big things we'll see coming back, it's coming down the pike is really important, is that it's grid friendly. Industrial heat can be generated by solutions that actually can take power when power is available and when it's cheap. So speaking of power, I mean, I think we're all familiar with the solar industry and tend to look at it as a mature industry, which in a way it has matured. But if you were to look at it just going out to 2030, there's more or less a 3x growth by that period, and even more so, well above 10x by 2050. So even looking out to 2030, we've got a tripling of the amount of power that is going to be available from solar energy. Now, what does this mean in terms of the grid, which is something that we think is highly important? And here with the duck curve, you see this is the amount of power that's being drawn from the grid after solar has been utilized. And what we see happening is we've already got curtailment occurring in places like California. So this is a California curve. And I think to some extent, California is ahead of other countries or regions, but it's an indication of what I think we're going to see happening in the future. Now, why is this important? Well, you've got a lot of work going on in LDES, which is essentially trying to time shift from that middle of the day to the evening and during the night where it's most needed, as you can see. But what I think is really interesting about thermal LDES is that we can take that curtailment piece, which actually is a massive cost to the industry, and it's only going to grow as we grow solar. But it's going to take that and actually reduce the cost of generating thermal energy storage. So in a way, there's a very nice P&L impact, which then when we say grid friendly, this is exactly what we mean. But it also means that the cost of industrial heat can actually reduce quite significantly.
Perfect. So when we're talking the cost of storage, the good news is it's already competitive today and it's only going to get better. So in terms of the incumbent technology for today is gas boilers, so a dirty technology. But the good news is there's paths to make it cheaper. So in terms of the first part is the actual storage medium used. Thermal LDES, generally speaking, uses abundant raw materials which are less costly than lithium batteries or typical electric batteries. Add on top of that the ability to rapidly charge using cheap off-grid pricing means that you can dramatically cut down the electricity component as well. Then when we go into how does the storage itself work, it's highly flexible, both in terms of how it charges and how it outputs. So when it charges, you can take electricity from grid or renewable projects. But in addition, and the key highlight for thermal LDES is it can also use waste heat from industry. That's then stored as heat at 90% plus efficiency in the form of heat. And then it can be distributed primarily back to industry to help decarbonize. They could also be provided in the form of power, as some of our companies here are presenting, whether for on-site operations or back to the grid itself as well. So the question then is, how can we help industry? And the good news is there's a massive opportunity. So about 25 terawatt hours or 1.5 trillion worth of capex needs to be installed. And across all these different industries, they face different needs because they need different temperatures. Iron and steel needs much higher temperatures to decarbonize compared to pulp and paper or food and bev, which would be more in the 100 to 400 Celsius range. So this means that we need different solutions to target these different industries. And thankfully, there's quite a number of companies here that are helping tackle this. So in terms of there's no winner takes all, there's going to be different companies tackling different aspects of this medium. And each of them have their own rich technology underlying them. And these technologies help determine what kind of temperature thresholds they can operate in. So for example, when we're talking Rondo and Antora, the fact they can go above 1,000 degrees Celsius means they can target iron and steel and cement. Whilst if you're talking on the 50 to 600 Celsius range, you've got companies like Heimann Brand Miller that can target applications such as pulp and paper or food and beverage today, meaning that you can target different aspects of this. The beauty of thermal elders as well is these players can intermix across these different parts. So for example, you can have a higher temperature player who may also want to go into some of these other aspects as well. And then what does this mean in terms of funding? The great news is it's only getting faster and faster. In this year alone, there's been more raised than in the prior 2 years combined. So part of that is there's just more and more companies coming online and raising funding, which is great. More solutions means more ways to tackle this issue. The other part is there's been players that have been going through the journey and maturing, which means that as they commercialize, they're getting larger and larger rounds. Notably, Antora's 150 million Series B and Rondo 60 million Series B as well. So as a result of this, there's more and more maturation of the market, and this is being recognized with project financing as well. Earlier this year, the DOE announced 500 million of project financing support, which is already helping out the commercialization. And in turn, what this means when it comes to the actual projects on the ground is more are being announced, and the capacity to meet them is also growing as well. So in terms, we're already seeing global partnerships being announced, notably Rondo's with the EDP and more recently with Aramco. We're seeing Enel partner with Brand Miller and Magaldi, and more of these players are recognizing the need to decarbonize and picking players to work with. And what does this then mean for the companies themselves? They've got a ton of demand to meet, so they're scaling out their capacity. So for example, Brand Miller's already got a 4 gigawatt hour plant online, and more players are scaling out their capacity to meet this rapid growth. And thanks to all that, now we've got a wonderful line of speakers to listen to.